how do you practice with that? So you're talking about finding that space or recognizing that space, that gap in between one self dying and another self being born. Like nuts and bolts, how do you practice that? Like my layman's way of understanding it is you're always in relationship. There's no self up here piloting the show fundamentally, okay? So when I get stuck in my head or I begin to be overwhelmed by some tidal wave of emotion, what's really helpful for me oftentimes is to begin to extend my attention not inward but out into my surroundings, okay? So it's like I'm going to let a new self be born by connecting. A lot of times it's physically or through the senses. Gets me out of my head into my surroundings. When I do that, whatever was going on, that energy goes out into the world. That self that I was getting fixated on, was whirling in on itself, dies and a new self is born. So you're dying into activity always because you're always doing something and you're always in relationship with your surroundings. Mm-hmm. How would you tweak that?
Well, that seems to be pretty fair description, but I think over time, and I'm no Zen master, as you know, and as everybody here in Vienna knows. I'm just a priest like you, but for me, what becomes more and more apparent over time is that the more continuously we include this dimension of zero that Roshi used to call it, or we include the death, we participate in the death of every moment. The more we can participate in the death of every moment, then we realize how life and death are always active. They're always present together. There's no way we can have a moment of life without a moment of death supporting it on both sides and inside as well. So we could become more and more comfortable and we see how it's more and more necessary to include the death of every moment in our everyday living of moments. And so what happens is there's a small, for me there's been a gentle reorientation from the way I usually was, where I was chasing the moment, chasing an accomplishment, chasing a material accomplishment. And you know what? It's like the harder you try to do something, the worse it turns out.
That's the story of my life.
You can't get yourself out of the way, right?
Yeah.
So this is so. But so rather than doing that, if we insert the only point, the main point of what I'm doing in this activity is to touch the absolute, is to touch zero, is to find God in the moment, if you will. Participate in both sides, in the living, and willingly participate in the death of yourself and the world in the next moment. Make that your goal through the thing that you're doing. Because and it becomes wonderful, because the only way you can really lose yourself in an activity is to give your best to it. But your eye is not on the ball. Your eye is not like thinking, that's where I want to hit this ball, mm-hmm. and it's got to be in that place. No, all you're worried about is connecting and enjoying that swinging and connecting with that as if it's your last action, and just say, this is it. I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to give it my all, and you lose yourself in it, and then you open yourself up for the universe to give rise to the next moment. So that's such an important point. We think that we can create the future. We can manage the future. We can't manage the future. The future happens despite our best efforts, not because of them. No matter how well or poorly we behave or fixated or not, the future is coming. There's no way that we can stop it. The best we can do is to participate in it. And when we do that, we align with time itself. We align with this whole activity. And lo and behold, wow, I gave myself, I thought I was dying into this thing. This was my last action. And yet here it is. And it's turned out that something wonderful was born in the next moment. Because I gave myself, because I was willing to die into the last moment, the next moment is more wonderful than I could have imagined it to be, right? And it's just the self giving itself back to its source. And the self, Roshi used to say, gives half of itself back to mother and the other half back to father. And then when mother and father come together, there's nothing separating them, and unity is expressed again, right? And so so the more clearly we perceive this space between moments, the death of every moment, and participate in it, our life becomes more free, because it's no longer shackled to the past moment to the same degree.
I'm going to process that for a second. So in some sense, you hit on the core of like Zen, and even a lot of times what people think is the cliche of Zen, which is like trying to not try or not trying to try. So how do you do that?
Well, like I said, it's just everybody does it all the time, but typically we tie that experience to doing our favorite thing, right? So eating your favorite food, being with your favorite person, watching your favorite movie. Time disappears, right? But we think that it's the particular thing that we're doing that elicits that experience, rather than us giving ourselves to it. And so, because when we're doing something that we don't like, of course, time drags on like at a snail's pace. And so, again, we say, oh, well, I want to avoid that thing because that makes me suffer. Time doesn't disappear. And I feel fixated and separate from what I'm doing. And the opposite is true when you're doing things you like. So we end up a slave to the things that we like, and afraid of the things and running from the things we don't like. And so this is why Zen completely says that's completely wrong. The thing you happen to like is not intrinsically what's giving you that feeling of time disappearing, of liking it. The thing that you're doing is giving your full attention to that thing, and that's why time disappears. So obviously, you know as well as I that Zen practice is oftentimes not pleasant. And this is intentionally done because it's like almost anybody can find a little peace while you're sitting on the cushion, breathing in a nice room with soft cushions and bells and incense. But what happens when you happen to be dog tired and you have to do that? Or it's actually pretty cold in there and you have to do that, right? It gets harder and harder. But what we discover over time is that you know what? I can still find this place between moments. I can still die into the moment, even though I'm not crazy about the circumstances, right? And so we discover little by little that it's not the thing that gives us our peace. It's giving the self away to whatever we're doing that allows us to find the peace in every moment.
So when you say give yourself away, what do you mean?
I mean, like Roshi used to say all the time, the self is that which separates. So inside and outside, like you said, our outsides and insides are continuously coming together to form ourselves, right? Without my brain and my organs, I could not be. But in exactly the same way, without the surrounding world, the self could not come into existence. It's the interaction between the two that allows consciousness to arise moment after moment. But that consciousness also perceives itself as separating my body and my surroundings, right? It's me. I can look into my body and I can look out from my surroundings, right? And so the thing that actually objectifies the world, able to create contrast in the world, is always right in the middle of the world, right? So we're all the center of our own universe. You know, metaphorically and actually figurative, literally as well. You know, but once we get rid of that self, once nothing is separating inside and outside, well, then inside and outside have no separation. They're one. It's one universe, right? So this is why getting rid of the self. So how do we get rid of the self? Well, how do we join inside and outside? Well, by focusing, by bringing together our whole body into some connection on the outside, right? Where we bring all of our focus, all of our bodily effort into one point that we're focusing on the outside. And so inside, outside, and self disappear into playing the piano, or writing on the page, or chanting, or posture, or breathing out. And it's continuous, over and over and over. The self is born continuously, without will or desire, and our only job is to give it away again, back into, so by giving away, I mean, so we make it so that inside the self disappears, so that inside and outside completely connect again.
So your literal answer is focus.
Focus, yeah, but focus is...
Taitoku. Talk about taitoku.
Taitoku is to apprehend with the body, right? So it's not an intellectual thing, and it's not just a seeing. It's not an intellectual seeing. It's not just a perception, right? An objective perception of circumstances. So when we make any objective experience, that's still not the state where you can't see anything because you're moving with everything, right? So taitoku is to apprehend with the body. So using the self to bring the body together with the surroundings in innumerable experiences.
So that's what you mean by when you say focus.
That's how I understand it.
So with